Good morning, everyone. My name is David Narrow. My background's in biomedical engineering and healthcare strategy consulting, and I'm the CEO of Sonovex. We're a clinical stage company spun out from Johns Hopkins, and the founders include myself, a Hopkins surgeon and world-renowned medical imaging professor. We've been supported by over $7.5 million of non-dilutive grants, primarily from the NIH, in addition to the equity capital raised to date. In one sentence, what we do is we leverage deep learning and 3D imaging to support AV fistula maturation for dialysis patients with our EchoMark and EchoSure technologies. These have already been cleared by the FDA with a general indication, and with our current studies, we're pursuing a specific label for these dialysis patients. We have protection with multiple international issued patents. Our business model centers around a high-margin consumable with a recurring revenue component as well, and there's about a $1.8 billion market for this first solution. We're also really excited about the pipeline technology we're actively developing called EchoGuide, which helps with another problem that these dialysis patients face to support these dialysis techs in actually cannulating these fistulas and grafts. So I know some other speakers have talked a little bit about these stats, so I'll go through them quickly, but dialysis is a major burden on the healthcare system. $36 billion is spent on end-stage renal disease in the United States. Of the $120 billion spent on kidney care, there will be about 5 million patients on dialysis in the next few years, and this market is growing at about a 6% CAGR. And despite the fact that these patients represent just 1% of the Medicare population, they consume 8% of the budget. So as you can imagine, the federal government has come up with a number of incentives to try to not only reduce the morbidity and mortality for these patients, but also reduce the financial burden. So bottom line is, if you need dialysis, you need a way to connect your bloodstream to the dialysis machine. And where most patients begin their dialysis journey is on a central venous catheter, which is a plastic tube that's inserted from your neck down into your heart. These catheters are by far the worst option for patients due to the high risk for bloodstream infections and associated hospitalizations. The next best option is called a graft. This is a synthetic tube that connects a vein to an artery in the arm. While these are far better than a catheter, the issue here is that they tend to clot off very frequently and therefore become expensive to maintain. The best option for patients and payers, the gold standard, is an AV fistula. And this is a direct connection between a vein to an artery in the arm. However, before you can start using these fistulas for dialysis, the small vein that connects to the artery must grow in size to accommodate the high flow rates needed to run the dialysis machine. But while you're waiting for that fistula to mature, you're stuck getting your dialysis through a catheter. And just to hammer this point home, catheters are bad for a number of reasons for a number of stakeholders. The most important is that you have a high risk for infection that results in expensive hospitalizations, on average twice per year. And this is a major driver of the 2 to 3 times greater mortality that these patients see compared to patients that are on a fistula. And then the payer, they're suffering an extra $160 or more of incremental cost per day dealing with this catheter versus a fistula. When you look across the entire US, 80% of patients begin their dialysis journey on a catheter, and when they try to shift over to these fistulas, more than 30% of newly created fistulas fail to mature, and the median time until you can get that catheter out is more than 6 months, and obviously a lot of bad things can happen in that period of time. In order to assess the status of a fistula, to make a decision, you either need to be a physician, or ideally have an ultrasound that tells you the flow rate, the size, and the depth of the fistula. Now, these patients, they go to the dialysis clinic 3 times a week for 4 hours a day. But the people that work in these clinics, they're not sonographers and they're not doctors. They're typically high school educated dialysis techs. So when you then ask these patients to go to a vascular lab to get a vascular ultrasound performed, due to a number of factors like access to transportation and a number of others, the compliance with these visits is only 12 to 33%. So if they don't show up, you can't get the diagnostic information, and there's a delay in maturation. So our vision at Sonovex is to meet the patient where they are and empower these dialysis techs to collect this vascular ultrasound data so that these docs can make decisions early and get these catheters out sooner. The way that we do this is with a 2-part technology called EchoMark and EchoSure. The EchoMark is an implantable bioresorbable polymer that's manufactured with a highly echogenic or ultrasound reflective method so that it can be used with our EchoSure companion device, which is a laptop form factor 3D ultrasound that leverages deep learning and other image processing algorithms to enable anybody off the street to collect a vascular lab quality ultrasound in seconds. This is cloud connected so that the doc is able to get the data right on their phone or on their desktop as soon as that data is collected to tell the dialysis center what to do with that patient at that point in time. The way this looks in practice is the EchoMark is slid underneath the fistula during the original procedure, adding about 2 to 3 minutes to the case, and it's the final step before closing the patient. And then in the clinic, all the tech needs to do is place the probe on the arm over where the EchoMark was inserted, Click the scan button, hold still, and seconds later, this information is collected and sent to the doc. Fortunately, there are existing ultrasound criteria that dictate what to do with these patients. So if things look good, you go ahead and you use that fistula and you pull that catheter out soon. Very commonly, the fistula is either too low flow, too deep, too small. You go ahead and you refer for an intervention in the next few days. Or for the 30% of patients that have a failed fistula, you go ahead and recognize that soon and get them back to the surgeon for a new fistula creation as soon as possible. So regardless of what happens to this patient, we get to an answer sooner and reduce the time that they're reliant on that central venous catheter. Last year, we published basically a technology validation study that proved that EchoSure in the hands of a dialysis tech or a nurse was as or more accurate and precise compared to a trained sonographer using conventional ultrasound, and this was published in the Journal of Vascular Access. We are currently wrapping up a clinical trial for the dialysis patient population that's nearing completion of enrollment. We have 0 events towards the primary safety endpoint, and we've got a 100% success rate on the effectiveness endpoint. We're most excited about this study that we're launching in the next few months here called the MUFASA trial. This is a 286-patient randomized controlled trial where we'll show that routine use of EchoMark and EchoSure can not only reduce the time to fistula maturation, but reduce some other important secondary endpoints like the rate of hospitalizations and the total cost of care. We're most excited about this dialysis market, but the same technology can be applied to other vascular surgeries where you connect 2 ends of a vein or an artery together and are concerned about an acute high-risk problem where detecting that early can resolve what would otherwise be a catastrophic complication. The business model centers around the high-margin consumable. Hospitals initially get paid through a pass-through payment and ultimately a Category 1 code once the publications from our active studies are issued. And then EchoSure provides some additional revenue on a leasing model from the dialysis clinic. Now, there are a number of non-patient stakeholders here that really influence how things are used, so we want to go through them pretty quickly here. The large dialysis organization has a lot of power and has a lot to gain and lose financially with this technology. So in their fee-for-service business, which right now is about 70% of their business, they're incentivized to reduce missed dialysis sessions and, more importantly, avoid these Medicare penalties for catheter utilization, which can be 2% of their annual payment. In the growing value-based care market, the Kidney Care Choices program, which is about 30% of the market now, all of those costs from those hospitalizations and catheter exchange procedures are now borne on their P&L. So they're super incentivized to eliminate or reduce these complications. Interestingly, for the first time, nephrologists are actually 50-50 partners financially with the dialysis organizations and have those shared financial incentives in addition to being the primary caregiver for these patients clinically. The nephrologist who owns the patient refers the patient to the surgeon for the fistula creation procedure and influences what they do. Surgeons will ultimately benefit from incremental payment, but they also get incremental or additional referral volume from these nephrologists by providing the service, and they get a higher ROI on their time because now when they're seeing these patients, it's because they're ready for an intervention, not just to check in to see how things are going. And then finally, the payer, they're able to benefit really dramatically from this, and we can send a health economics model over to folks who are interested. Really proud of the team we've assembled. We're headquartered in Baltimore and have a presence throughout the country and in Canada. Alex Yevzlin is our Chief Medical Officer. He runs the program at University of Michigan. He also co-wrote the National Kidney Foundation Guidelines for Vascular Access. This is incredibly well respected in the space. John Rapp's our Chief Business Officer. He held the same title for another dialysis company that was acquired by Medtronic in 2019 and joined our team shortly after that transaction. We've also got an incredible board and advisory board with leaders across kidney care, nephrology, patient advocacy, and vascular surgery. So really appreciate the time and attention today, and if you're interested in learning more, please find me later on in the conference.